This video is sort of the preamble to tying an oboe reed, and it's only going to focus on your spool technique. Okay, so we're breaking this down. I think that's usually the best way to go about doing this because tying is critically important. Sorry, that's my dog. If we don't tie the blank well, then you're kind of in trouble for the rest of the reed making process because we need a really strong foundation. Okay, so I usually use a C-clamp to tie on, but because of this video and the space and the lighting, I'm now going to tie on this really heavy toolbox. But you can tie on a C-clamp, chair leg, desk leg, anything that's really solid and strong that's not going to move because you're going to be pulling pretty significantly. So just go ahead and put your thread through and around whatever you're going to tie onto, and do maybe 3 or 4 sort of tie your shoe knots so that the thread is nice and tight and snug. I usually do 4. Okay. Then take up your slack a little bit, and you're going to put some beeswax on your thread. This will help make it a little tacky and a little sticky so that it doesn't slide around on whatever you're using to practice this technique. You can use a wooden dowel, a pencil, a pen. This is a piece of oboe tube cane. Anything that's kind of round in shape works really well and strong. It has to be pretty strong and thick because otherwise it'll collapse. All right, so I'm right-handed, so if you are left-handed, you will need to reverse this. But the first thing I do is put it in the palm of my hand so that this, which is what we call the guide string, is between my first 2 fingers, and my thumb sits up like that, okay? And so there's initially this process where we go around and over, and we are continuously, sometimes we use our first finger, sometimes we use our thumb, depending on where we are on the thread. So for right now, I want you to just practice on keeping this nice and strong so you can almost play a little song, and switching back and forth so that you can feel that either way, okay? All right, now when we start wrapping a reed, we start with the cane on top of the thread, which is what we're going to do here. So all we're going to focus on right now is when we go over, we see the hand up and your thumb guides the thread over and then does that. And then sometimes people will shift to their first finger, go over, shift to your thumb like this. So just practice this motion so that you're kind of using your first finger when you go under and your thumb when you go over. And just try to get the wraps nice and close together. See how I'm doing that? So when I'm over, the thumb is kind of helping place it. When I go under, it switches to the first finger. Okay? And just get kind of used to doing that. Now, is that first finger is not always critical. I think for beginners, it just kind of helps give them a little bit more control. Sometimes you'll need to create a little more slack. So just kind of get used to this idea of doing that, okay? Once that feels pretty comfortable to you, we go to phase 2. The next thing we want to talk about is keeping the tension straight here and when it's on the other side of the object. So put this down. Oops, sorry. The spool slipped in my hand. Okay, so I'm going to go around. And what's really important is we keep this, which is called your guide thread, because this is what's going to go down and sort of straighten out as you wrap down the reed. So that's why we call it the guide thread. This is your spool thread. Tension needs to be strong here and here. If you let either one go, tying problems happen. If you start to slide or do this, that causes tying problems. We want the pressure on the cane, on the 2 blades, to be equal, which is why we want to make sure this all stays very straight and true, okay? So we've gone around once. When I go over the thread, I'm keeping a nice firm grip on this. I'm almost pulling the object towards me with my left hand, right? So that I can keep the tension here and here. So when I go over, I'm kind of pulling towards me. When I come back, I still have a firm grip, but more of the tension is in my right hand. So it's kind of like left hand, right hand, right hand, left hand, right hand. Okay, I'm doing this slowly. Initially, it's not going to be that slow. But as you can see, nice tight wraps and they're all straight, okay? Now we need to go back, we need to go down to the left. And this is where the crossover comes in. So what has to happen is we need to take the spool hand and we need to shift it to the left and then start wrapping on this side down, like this. And that's when the whole thumb, first finger thing starts to happen. And now you can kind of see why we call this the guide thread, because as we wrap down, this is being pulled like that, okay? And that's how we get down to the cork side of the reed, okay? And then you just kind of practice getting them all nice. But the whole time I'm doing this, I'm pulling on this with my left hand, depending on where the tension needs to be to keep these two threads straight, okay? The reason that's important is because if there's any sort of slant or wonkiness, it puts unequal pressure on the blades of the reed, and then they will shift and you'll get big overlaps and you won't be happy. All right, so I've wrapped down, and now comes the fun part. We're gonna grab with 2 fingers here. We're going to keep this tension here. It doesn't have to be as strong as when you're tying, but it still needs to be there. The more critical tension needs to be there. If you let this one go, the whole thing's going to come unraveled. Okay? So put a little slack in your spool. And then I use my first finger and I go around like this. I grab and make this loop. I slide this on. And then, being ever so careful, I pull. And then that makes sure that that is nice and tight down there. So again, loop through, pull. I have a separate video just on the knot. So hopefully you've already mastered the knot before you even got to this point, because I teach the knot first, obviously. So I hope that helps. When we tie an oboe reed, we'll do the crossover usually after 2 or at the most 3 wraps. We don't do 6, 7, 5, 6, 7 a lot, because the wider that is with the crossover, the more chance you have that the blades will shift, okay? So just for practice purposes, that's why we do the crossover that way, so you can really see it and you can really play with it. But in reality, when we tie for real, we will only do about 3 up to the end of the staple and then cross over, because we want that tension to be nice and strong on the 2 blades. All right, I hope that helps. Practice on this first and then switch to a real piece of cane and a staple in your mandrel. And I guarantee you it will be a much easier transition, because once we add the cane, then we have to worry about actually holding the cane in place as we tie, and that adds another layer of difficulty. All right, good luck.